Looks like the third iteration of the drive shaft fits.
Hooray!
Yay!
So we're gonna get the drive shaft bolted down, and then we gotta run all the way to the shop to get the trailer.
And come all the way back to get the car.
Come all the way back to get the car. It's about a 30-minute drive. And then we gotta drive all the way back to the shop with the car. And then we're gonna get this thing set up. Get our ride height, our spring preload for the shocks, and I think we're gonna have to adjust the thrust angle a bit to get the alignment good. Double check the pinion angle, and really that's it. At that point, she ought to be good to go to the track. I think everything else is in decent order.
Yeah, baby.
Yo, drive shaft fit and worked, and old Goldie drove herself on to the trailer. Right now what we're doing is heading to the shop to get started on the alignment and the setup, and hopefully it won't need a whole lot of work. Brakes are a little spongy, we'll need to bleed them a little bit more. Maybe a couple other little things to deal with, but all in all, we're in good shape, and we're gonna get this thing set up tonight.
Proud of you, dude.
So we got the boys in the house, Matt and Matthew helping me get this thing dialed in, and already we had to adjust our track locating rod because we had, the axle was clearly like shifted a little bit this way. So luckily it's all pretty adjustable, so we were able to just swoop it back in.
And it worked swimmingly.
Everything looks pretty good now. I do think we're gonna have some thrust angle issues, but we wanna get everything else just at least close before we even bother putting the heads on. Because at that point we're gonna have to change a whole lot of stuff all at once. But I got the tire pressures all set, and we're gonna just start getting measurements. Matthew took ride height readings and everything looked pretty even, so I don't think we need to change the height at all, but I would like to take some preload out of those springs and hopefully just soften up the back end just slightly and see if that maybe helps it grip a little better. So the front camber is gonna have to be disregarded. We got shock issues, knuckle, that's a whole mess up there. But the rear thrust angle, where'd it go? Thrust angles, geez, like nothing, dude. Totally within a tolerable range. Like that looks really good, dude. I don't think we even change it, dude. Honestly, I don't think it's worth all the trouble.
Change this though for yourself.
Yeah, we'll get the toe tidied up. Oh, the toe's way bad. All right, so the toe needs a lot of adjustment. Thrust angle looks on the money. We got tracking adjusted already. So we'll just double check the pinion angle and pull the wheels and loosen up the preload on those rear coilovers. And then I think really that's all the car needs, dude. But the toe is in a pretty bad way. We're seeing like, what was it, 2 degrees total toe? 1.5 degrees total toe. So that's pretty lousy. So we'll get that straightened up. Can't do shit about the camber. Caster's like dead nuts even, which we can't do anything about that either, but that's pretty cool. And yeah, man, damn, everything looks really good. Back out in the garage again, and I have a couple of things I need to cover on the car. I have a couple of things that I did wrong on this thing that we need to clear up. So for just full transparency here, this was a big project on the Z we did. My style with the Z has always been doing things quick, doing things cheap, doing things easy, but making it all work. And there's some things that I did that were a failure on the making it work department that I need to cover. So previously, we took a test drive in the car, and I heard some noise coming from the rear end. Now, we don't have any bushings on the ladder bar setup. It is solidly mounted to the axle, the ladder bars are, and then they have Heim joints that go straight to the chassis of the car. There is zero cushion or insulation of any kind between the rear axle and the chassis of the car. So, took it for a ride, And I put some cameras up under the car so you kind of see what the suspension does, but I really didn't get it into any kind of load. We just kind of were cruising. I think I might have gotten up to maybe 40 miles an hour tops. No faster than that, but I was getting a lot of just kind of like a whirring sound from the rear. And so when I put this axle together, I did it based on feel for the backlash and stuff. You know, I've assembled a whole lot of rear axles. You know, I know what feels normal and I know what's like just obviously off the wall, way off. So I set it up by feel. I got it to where I thought it was probably, so the spec on the Ford Explorer axle for backlash is 8 to 14 thousandths, I think, maybe 10 to 14. And I set it up and I thought it was pretty close to 14. But when I got that gear noise, I'm like, okay, well, I should pull the cover off and check it with some tools and just kind of see where we're at, just make sure we're in a normal range. And what I actually measured with the dial indicator is 17 thousandths backlash. So about 3 thousandths too much backlash, which isn't outrageous, you know, for a car that's going to go quarter miles and then get put back on the trailer. Yeah, I don't think there'd be really any huge consequence, but I thought maybe this is related to the noise. So I went ahead and re-shimmed it, tightened up the backlash. Now I'm sitting right around 8 thousandths. And I did some paint marks before when it was at the 17 thousandths, and I did some paint marks afterwards. And I'll show you what my paint marks look like right now and kind of go over what we're looking at there and what I think about it. So I've got the cover pulled off. I had to drop the fuel cell out. It's really not too bad to actually get to all of this. And I already have my paint on the gears. It's been a few days, so it's kind of thinning out. And you can see on the coast side, our contact is right here at the heel on all the teeth. And the paint marks were a lot more clean days ago when I first did this. But anyway, we got marks on the heel on the drive side, and on the coast side, our marks way up at the toe. So to have those marks on the toe and these marks on the heel indicates that we have too much backlash, but we don't. I already took this apart and measured it, and I'm sitting right at 8 thousandths, which is the low side of spec. Really closer to 7 thousandths, to be honest. I'm just gonna be honest there. But we got decent preload. Everything else seems okay, but we're way out on the heel on the drive side. And before, when I had 17 thousandths, it was real similar. So I thought lowering that backlash would straighten things out. Now the pinion depth seems okay because the mark is like in the center of the tooth from out here to down in the crevice or in the valley or whatever you want to call it. So really looking at both directions, our pinion angle seems fine. We're centered, but outward inward looks like our backlash is off. So I'm like, what the hell? I took a bunch of backlash out of it. Why didn't it get better? Well, the reason I think is when we were putting this axle together, we actually had two axles, if you remember from several episodes ago. We had one axle that we got that already had all the brackets shaved off of it that we thought was a limited slip, but it turned out to not be, and it had a 373 gear in it. Then we went to the junkyard and got the other axle that had all the brackets on it, and it was actually a limited slip, also with a 373. So what we decided to do was swap the limited slip carrier over to the housing that's already been shaved. After that, I didn't swap the ring gears over from carrier to carrier. I literally grabbed the whole carrier assembly with the ring gear on it and threw it in the case without changing out the pinion. So what we have is a ring gear from one axle and a pinion from a different one. They're both 4-8/8s, they're both 373 gears, but these gear sets are sold as a married couple. They're supposed to stay together, and I know that. That's standard practice. But it didn't occur to me at the time because we were just in a hurry. We were trying to get it done so we could get done what we wanted to do that night, and I neglected to consider that, and I think that's why our tooth pattern is off, even though the backlash is good, even though the pinion angle is good, our preload's all appropriate. I did not replace any bearings, but they all checked out they all appeared okay. There was no pitting on the inner or outer races. So anyway, slapped it together. I think that's the problem. Now that I've taken the backlash out, the tooth pattern still looks like crap, but we'll take it for a drive and see how much worse it is or better, or if it's the same noise level wise. And I'll probably just send it like that until I'm sure that 373 is the right gear choice. One concern I have is the stock gear ratio is like a 350. The one we took out was like a 354 or something like that on the gear ratio. The stock R200 diff for the turbo 2+2 S130s. So we actually have a higher gear ratio now, and I'm just not sure if we're gonna have enough gear to make it to the finish line on a quarter-mile track. So I really just have to send it with the 373 despite any gear noise it has and see if that's the correct gear ratio. If it is, I can pick up a set of 373 ring and pinions off eBay for like 80 bucks. So then I'll go and I'll swap them out to their pair and I'll get good tooth contact and we'll go from there. Something else that we need to cover on is, you saw a few weeks ago I used, whenever I was doing the brake line work on this car, I was using compression fittings to connect two brake lines, two 3/16 brake lines. And I got a couple comments that were like, hey, that's dangerous, don't do that. And I'm like, that was surprising to me because honestly, like in automotive school, we didn't ever learn about those things. It's not like I learned that when I went to school. It's something I kind of picked up along the way through necessity, through having to make a sectional repair of brake line where it's really hard to access for flaring. And I discovered these couplers, these compression fittings, and I have used them dozens of times with 100% success rate. I've had zero issues out of them at all. But sure enough, after I saw those comments and I looked a little bit more into the product itself, everyone who sells these says these are not intended to be used for brake lines. They are not meant for over like 250 PSI of pressure. Like these are not the correct way to connect two brake lines. And the reason is, even though I've had great success with them and they've been really easy to install and they've been perfect, and honestly, like I've put them on so many things, including both of our cars. The problem with them is when they fail suddenly and completely. Like it's a complete loss of pressure, whereas, you know, like corroded brake lines or, you know, something that's rubbing, you know, you'd likely start with a small leak. You'd feel your brake pedal turn to shit gradually over time as you leaked fluid out. And it wouldn't be, typically it's not going to be a total loss of fluid pressure. So just a correction there. I'm not suggesting that you guys use compression fittings. I've done it a bunch with success, but I do plan to remove the compression fittings off the brake lines and go to a normal union with flared fittings, just for peace of mind more than anything else, and just to do things the right way. And I just want to disclose that that is not the right thing to do. For those of you who thought that was wrong, you were right, 100%. And I'm going to take that little tool out of my bag from now on, moving forward. Finally, the last little thing I got going on is a little fluid leak that I'll show you down here. If you look right here, you'll see a little bit of blue fluid on the bottom of the axle. It's right under that union, but that union's not leaking. But this is actually where we cut and welded the axle points. Whoa, you really lost that one, dude.
Sorry.
It's okay. So I used a MIG welder to connect the tubes together, and evidently somewhere under our paint, we've got a little gear oil leak. I'm gonna need to take some of that paint back and see where my leak is and re-weld it. I should have TIG welded the tube. That would have probably been a better way to go about doing that. So between that, our misuse of the compression fittings, and our mismatching of the drive gears, so far that seems to be the extent of things I need to sort out on this. But I'm gonna go ahead and get it back together tonight, and hopefully we'll get some good weather next weekend and we can go hit XRP or I-30 or Yellow Belly and make some baseline passes and see what the car's gonna do. See if I'm just worried like hell about the tracking rod. I don't love it, honestly. I really don't like it. I don't know how much force that thing's gonna see. I'm hoping not very much because I really just don't trust what I did with it. I might end up just relocating the fuel cell and going to a pan hard bar. I feel like I could do that better, but we'll try this out and see how it goes. Whew, all right, done. Rear axle's back together, filled up with fluid, everything's torqued down. And we're still on C-clips, for anyone wondering. This is still a C-clip axle car. Once we go turbo 400 with a trans brake, that's gonna have to go. But as of right now, it's still a C-clip axle. Everything is assembled, it's full of fluid, everything's torqued down. I ran a little bead across where I saw that little bit of leak coming through the axle housing, and I didn't see anything else getting wet afterwards, so went ahead and just hit it with a little bit of paint, and she's ready for another test drive. On the test drive, there was still a ton of whining noise coming from the diff, so I went ahead and ordered a new ring and pinion set off of eBay, a used set I got for 80 bucks, and shot up to the shop, installed it with all new bearings, re-shimmed everything, and 100% renewed everything in the axle. So basically a full rebuild, and that sorted out the issue and got everything working smoothly. Oh man, boys, this has been quite an endeavor. I think I finally got everything squared away. Brought the car to the shop this morning, Sunday, we're closed. Just opened it up, put the car on the lift, and totally went through the differential. All new bearings, new ring and pinion, well, used ring and pinion that are actually a proper match for each other. When I laid these two ring gears on the table, it was clear there was a difference. One of them was noticeably taller than the other. Anyway, got it all set up, ran my paint marks, everything was nice and centered and looked excellent. Put it back together, took it on the road, and it's just smooth as silk. I drove this car here 14 miles from McKinney with that noisy ring and pinion setup, and it was just whoa, whoa, whoa the whole way. But I'm like, you know, screw it. I'm doing ring and pinion and all the bearings anyway. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I knew it wasn't like binding up. So run it all the way here, and finally got it all straightened out, and I'm really excited about that. Went ahead and flow checked the injectors and gave them a reverse flush while I'm at it. And old Goldie's finally ready to do something, and she looking thick with those wheels back there. Hit it! Got the Z on the scales, and it actually came up 10 pounds lighter empty weight, or without me in it, than it was whenever it had the independent rear suspension. So really no added weight at all by doing the Ford 8.8 swap. The car weighed in at 2481 empty weight prior to the axle swap. Now it's 2471. So really not a whole lot of sacrifice here, to be honest, except the big holes in the floorboard, which I still plan to cover up, and that might add a pound or two to it. Yeah, so really, like, pretty excited to see that didn't add a whole bunch of weight. But that's all I got for you guys this week. Got some fuel parts for the Lexus that I still need to get in. It's going to be up and running again soon. But that's all for now. We'll see you at the track this weekend.